Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first session of Existential Hope and Maturity, Visions of Possible Achievements with Thomas Moynihan. My name is Jonathan Molina Garcia. I'll be your moderator for the remaining sessions, and I'll now read a description for the course before handing it off to Tom. Civilization can be thought of as a process that canalizes nature's energies toward intelligent ends, converting and restructuring blind physical flows into intelligent systems of welfare and value. Across our species' history, this undertaking has been accomplished at increasingly intensive and extensive scales. Human civilization is now a major factor in the Earth system, but arguably we have not seen anything yet. What might be the full scope of what can be achieved? Ever since the Enlightenment, philosophers have written about what they call the maturity of civilization as an important goal and standard. This has been conceived invariably as some growing degree of independence or autonomy from the constraints and dictates of brute nature, including our own evolved psychology. Construed in this way, we can draw a continuous and consistent line from the early 19th century socialist utopians all the way to Nikolai Kardashev in his classification of planetary, stellar, and galactic echelons of a civilization's energetic capture. Tracing this thread from the Enlightenment up to the present day, this course will explore the increasingly ambitious and bold visions of what can ultimately be accomplished by intelligence within the physical cosmos. In the growing research surrounding existential risk, we are becoming sensitized to what the various failed states might look like for civilization. But there is also an important tradition of thinking about the possibility space of big wins. So, what are the different ways we can construe of civilizational maturity? What are different ways, normative, physical, technological, etc., of classifying and measuring this putative state? From the Enlighteners to early techno-utopians like J.D. Bernal and J.B.S. Haldane, from the Russian cosmists to Soviet pioneers like Iosif Shklovsky and Stanislaw Lem, from Freeman Dyson and SETI to contemporary experts on the topic of grand futures. This course will explore the lineage of visions of what intelligence might ultimately physically achieve. And from that, please take it away, Tom.
Cheers, thanks a lot. Hi everyone. So I think the way I'm going to do things is I'll talk a bit, I guess, about what I want to achieve with you guys over the course of the course, and then I think it might be nice to get introductions from everyone because it's just nice to know why you guys are here, what you're interested in, and just so I get to know you guys a bit. And then I'm going to present. We've got this PowerPoint thing to do, so just to kind of give us something to meet to then dissect. Hopefully then we'll have a good conversation. I want this to be fun. That's the main goal, and interesting. So throughout, if I'm blabbing on or giving a presentation and you have a question or you want to interject, please do. Please, it's always. There's never a point when you can't stop me and ask a question or whatever you want. So what do I want to achieve with this course? I guess the description, hopefully we've got something across. So I just wanted to kind of look at from science fiction, but also science, because actual scientists have often made claims about these things. Talk about what these visions of the far future and what intelligence or rationality or moral agency, however you want to put it, might eventually achieve. And the emphasis is on might, and I guess in some of the stories that I'm going to try and weave together. I think one of the things that I want to stress throughout is that there's a trans-historical tradition of people being utopianists of various stripes, but a lot of those that tradition I don't think we're going to cover here, or we're going to try and zoom in on something more specific. because lots of those people would make the claim that that utopian they imagined is going to happen, regardless of what we do. It's the kind of end point of history, if you want to be Hegelian about it, or in kind of the Platonic utopia, he kind of said that it would exist somewhere else in space or time inevitably, because space and time are so large. So I want to kind of explore visions of what could be achieved that are based in some kind of actual scientific claims, and obviously because that's revisable, we're going to look at some claims that are now wrong, but within the framework of the time, and B, claims by people about what could be achieved that are also sensitive to historical contingency, and more importantly, I guess the fact that everything can go wrong. So one of the themes that I want to talk with you guys about is what I'm trying to call, the high-stakes worldview. I think it's an aspect of modernity as like a historical category, which recognizes that the future is not going to be business as usual. It's either going to be potentially much worse or much better, but it's not necessarily going to stay steady or the same. Now, you see this in lots of different strands of thought, but this idea that, say humanity goes extinct or messes up the whole biosphere, that's a radically worse future. But then there are these potentials that we're going to explore in this course of people imagining these kind of big wins. So say life is spread elsewhere, there is more vibrance and value in the universe than there otherwise is now. And these people we're going to be talking about have made the claim that it's based upon what humanity does next that will be the building blocks for these kind of grand futures to happen. So yeah, that's it. That's what I want to explore with all of you. And yeah, I want to get your thoughts on these things, because a lot of these visions are kind of very speculative, very science fiction rather than science in their kind of aesthetic vibe, I guess. Some of you might completely disagree with some of them. Some of you might have better versions. Some of you, I just want to explore all of that stuff. So yeah, that's the remit and the goals, and I'm excited to get into it with all of you. So for now, if you guys don't mind, if any of you don't want to introduce yourselves, that's absolutely fine. But it would be nice, as I said, to just to get to know you all a little bit. So I think I'm not sure if there is a universal order here with the Zoom, but I'm seeing Rachel at the beginning, so maybe we start there and basically just say, I guess, say why you're interested in the course, maybe say why you're not, but I wouldn't know why you're here otherwise, but say why you're interested in the course and a bit about yourself, standard stuff. So yeah, if you guys want to kind of introduce now, that would be great.
Hey, yeah. So my name is Rachel. I'm based in San Francisco right now, and I'm studying for my Bachelor of Architecture. I'm here because I'm really interested in the overlapping between architecture, philosophy, technology, and maybe more sort of the biological. So where human behavior might interact with artificial intelligence and also the physical built world.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds perfect as a set of interests. Yeah, thanks. So next is Carl. So I've spoken to Carl before, but for everyone to get to know everyone, yeah, if you just kind of let us know who you are, why you're interested, etc.
Hello, and nice to see you, and nice to see everyone again, and nice to see everyone who I haven't seen before. But my name is Carl. I'm meant to be a kind of philosopher of geographical thought. I'm interested in sort of the human self-image and with the bounds of that can be sustained within the, I suppose, the disciplinary context of human geography at the moment. Well, I'm here because I think the questions that we're exploring are sort of have some bearing on the things that I'm interested in, and also I basically sign up to everything that seems cool at the new center. So, and I have been for a while. So nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Carl. Next on my screen is it Philippe or Philip?
Hi, it's Philippe. Nice to meet you. I'm very happy to be here. I'm an autodidact, but I'm here at the Critical Philosophy Department, and I enrolled in this seminar because as I'm trying to develop some kind of philosophical pedagogy for the early infancy, futures as the ones we're about to study here. This seems a great place to test ways of seeing how mind can envision itself in the future. My departing point would be something like Greg Egan's Diaspora, where a great accident makes mind travel across universes. So I think this is going to be fun.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and I hope it helps with your project, and yeah, it sounds like the right place to be. So thanks a lot. Yeah, next, Alexandra, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hey, yes. Do you hear me? These are new. Yep, cool. My name is Alexandra. I'm a landscape architecture coming from Stockholm. I'm a certificate student. So this is my first seminar. I'm very excited about it. I hope to achieve existential maturity through all the entire program. Since I'm a landscape architecture, I ventilate a lot with the idea of nature, and I keep on doubting it. So I keep on wanting to doubt it. So that's why I'm also here. So yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, next I'm seeing Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric. I'm a philosophy and sociology student, although in recent times I have kind of opted out of academia, like in the future. And basically what this has led me to is more an orientation around political strategy and like practical kind of stuff, but I still, like, through my background in philosophy and sociology, I still come at these questions from a very abstract angle, and also ask myself like something like, okay, at like very small local like very mundane projects can, like, what does it do for us if we may recognize like the mission of like human intelligence or civilization? Is that just like a post in our smaller action? Is that just like a post hoc rationalization, or is that something that can mobilize our actions here and now if we recognize ourselves in this kind of mission that doesn't exist apart from us? We practice it, but yeah, like what does this do for us actually? And yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah. It's, the practicality of any of this, I think, is also a useful touchstone, something that hopefully we'll explore. But yeah, all of this stuff is kind of crazy, like, what could happen 10,000 years in the future. But I'm always interested in the question of, how does that ground our commitments and responsibilities now? How does it change them? So thanks for raising that point.
Yeah, basically, is it just a nice story that we tell about ourselves and that looks kind of nice, looks kind of nice retrospectively, or does it actually have some bearing on what we can do right now? And does it make any difference in it, or is it just a story and that's it? And yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I'm fascinated in those questions as well. So it's the right place to explore those. Yeah, thank you. So next, Andrew, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do so. I'm, as far as everything is concerned, I'm just a little guy. English major turned into autodidact, similar to Philippe. As far as why I took the course, I will be perfectly honest. I don't have as good of an articulation, other than I kind of thought the concept looked cool. So to vamp a little bit, given that I'm interested in sort of, the way that I phrase it is like using thought as like a martial art of thought, using this sort of course as a way to explore the sort of more macrocosmic implications of philosophy and design and all of that could be interesting as a way of, how do I want to phrase it? Basically, as a way of exploring the more architectural, as has been previously stated, elements of philosophy and such, just kind of gives a new set of tools to be able to implement, give a sort of better context for how these sorts of philosophical martial schools, for lack of a better term, can be created, what is even possible, that sort of thing. Namely, the aspect of the description of like the idea of how do we channel energy through a particular concept of history, future or otherwise, borrowed from a little bit of my more Afrofuturist former leanings. It vibed with me enough to where I want to kind of figure out what's going on here.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, with the energy question, I think we'll cover that in the second session. So yeah, that's one to look forward to. So next, Zenobio, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
I'm
Zenobio. I'm a designer and researcher based in Brazil, currently writing my bachelor thesis on the different approaches of functionality in the speculative design, particularly the parafunctionality and hyperfunctionality, and yeah, how they could be applied in actually in deployed in the future scenarios and distant scales. And in general, I'm interested in the Promethean aspects of design, and particularly regarding the planetary design. So, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's just as you know, Andrew said the word macrocosmic, and I was like, well, things are definitely going to get macrocosmic. Similar with the speculative design angle, and yeah. So again, brilliant. Thanks for introducing yourself. So oh yeah, next Denise.
Hi, my name is Denise Luna. I am a certificate student for the Post-Planetary Universal Design program. I am an architect, sort of researcher and professor from Mexico. I guess I'm interested in an architecture as other world making. So I have more questions than everything else regarding the future. Like what feature or futures in plural is architecture involved in? Where these notions of futurity come from or should come from, or where towards what that could be, and what techniques or technologies sort of evolve or emerge or whatever come with these notions of future, of what the future could be or should be, right? So yeah, that's sort of the gist of it. Thank you.
Thanks. No, thanks. Yeah, I'm really glad that there's a whole bunch of architects here, because yeah, I'm going to be learning as much from you guys, and I think yeah, I'm really interested in having that kind of conversation. You know, obviously all the other people here as well, equally so, but particularly yeah, architectures, because I have taught architectural students, design students before, but I think it's because some of this stuff I think is very relevant there. So yeah, it's exciting to have some actual architects here to talk about when we're talking about these visions of like ultimate architecture. So yeah, thank you very much. Next, Maria.
Hi, I used to be an art critic, but now I study something like, I know this sounds pretentious, but it's iconology. It's text to image relations. And I know on a superficial level, Russian cosmists, their appropriation in the art world, but I don't really like it. And I read sci-fi as any decent person. And I like this plot in Haldane when Moon was destroyed, because I read it in 7 years. And I think good plot. And I want to unite it all and see wild and untamed utopian thinking.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that would be a really interesting conversation again. Kind of selfishly for my own reasons. not having anything to do with the art world, I have obviously noticed, however, that the cosmists have like had this uptake recently, and yeah, I would be, yeah, that would be a really cool conversation to have for me to learn, why, and why now, why not earlier, that kind of thing. So yeah, that'll be interesting to talk about down the line. So yeah, thanks, Maria. So next I'm seeing is it Matthias or Matthias?
Yeah, Mateus. Hi, everybody. I am a PhD student in philosophy, and I think in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And I think there are interesting and philosophical implications in this seminar. That's why I kind of enrolled, but I think that's sort of I'd say the contingent reason I enrolled, because I think I really enrolled because I'm a huge sci-fi fan from a long while. I'm also very much into utopianism and futurology. I have a background in biology, and while I was studying biology, I was very interested in astrobiology. I read Freeman Dyson and Haldane a lot and things like that. So I think too many things that I was very interested in were already in the course. So I thought I had to enroll.
Thank you. Yeah, again, sounds like perfect conjunction of interests. It's also good to have philosophers here to, ground us in, well, actually, that's probably the wrong word to use, but, ground us in actual rigorous thinking. So yeah, thanks so much. Good to have you here. So next I'm seeing Enda. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Hi, I'm Enda. I currently live in London, but hopefully not for too much longer. I don't know. My background's in art and philosophy. I have a problem where I just structure my life around New Center seminars. So I just really was interested in this for like general reasons. I guess one thing that I was thinking about recently was I'm sort of involved in a bunch of political organizing stuff, and something that I've been trying to instigate in the groups that I'm part of is shifting our kind of time scale and our time frame for revolutionary kind of activity and so on. And I'm very wary that in shifting that kind of scale, it's not simply a matter of, pushing or prolonging the kind of, time at which we think that change is going to happen. It's, it's a lot more a complex kind of thing that needs to be thought out. So that's kind of one thing that I would be like, it's maybe a frame of mind that I'm approaching this course with, but yeah, I'm here because I'm just generally interested, really.
Great, thank you. Again, yeah, this sounds like the perfect class. But yeah, no, so I've been thinking a lot about that. It's very similar things to that recently as well, like, how we can shift to the long term and, the political, I guess, how to make that political when you're talking about, future persons, which is so abstract that no actual politician is probably going to be interested in that, but nonetheless they should be, because our actions now are in a sense damaging those future people. So yeah, I today I think in the stuff I'm going to present, I'm going to talk a bit about time and scales changing and stuff, so you might find that interesting. But yeah, that sounds really cool. It's nice to have a political dimension to this stuff, I think. Otherwise, yeah, again, it just kind of becomes very abstract and removed from our current situation. But I want the opposite to be the case. So yeah, so thank you very much. I think so. The order's now become messed up. I think let's go for Henrik.
Yes. So my name is Henrik. I am currently studying my master's here in media theory in the University of Amsterdam, and I remember it was around the same time that I was choosing the seminars to join here. A friend of mine showed me the X Risk book, and I found it very fascinating. And I decided to take the seminar so I could enjoy the opportunity of having lectures with the author at the same time I start to read it. And regarding the course itself, I believe that conceptualizing the futures is a discussion that is very interesting, especially with the outcomes we can see from automation and machine learning. and how these aspects can fundamentally change how we are organized as a society. And I believe that being able to have a broader understanding of futures can be very helpful for me while writing future critical theory, you know. And besides the science fiction aspects of it is very cool, like just mentioning the Kardashev scale and Dyson. Yeah, that's why I decided to go with this course, and I have a very good expectations for it.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that's like, I guess why I used the word fun a couple of times when I was, spieling at the beginning is, it's kind of endless fun in many ways, thinking about these things like the Kardashev scale and all of those things. I just think they're very fun concepts, as well as being, as Ender was just referring to, also, potentially politically, exigent as well. So yeah, hopefully we can walk that tightrope. So yeah, thank you very much. So next, Armin.
Yeah, hi, I'm Arman. I'm a science fiction writer based in Iran. So I think that takes care of why as well. That's it. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Oh, great. Oh, excellent. So again, this is like the perfect fields, the perfect backgrounds of for this course. So yeah, again, having an actual science fiction writer here. Yeah, I hope that just any of this helps you or inspires you, your writing. Yeah, so yeah, it's good to have you here. Thanks very much. So again, the order is now strange, but let's go for Veronica.
Yeah, okay. So hi, I'm Veronica. I'm an MA student in New Media and Film Studies, and I'm based in Frankfurt for the moment. And was just like interested in the course generally, but also I would like to broader, for example, like how to approach it. So maybe in sense of like methodological tool of speculative thinking, but also any other topics that already have been mentioned in this like introduction, round circle. So yeah, just combination of this and science fiction and utopia and everything together, basically.
Thanks very much. I was expecting and hoping there to be some, media and film people here, because in the last New Center course I taught, we did end up actually talking about film a fair amount. I don't really know anything about film because, my job is to read these old books. So, aside from watching the obvious films, like I don't have any kind of, I say this because one of my best friends is like a film scholar, and he knows like these amazing, like, old kind of Russian sci-fi films and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, basically, again, selfishly for me, it's really cool to hopefully get some recommendations of stuff that I wouldn't have otherwise heard of. So yeah, great to have you here as well. So yeah, next, Vincent.
Hi, my name is Vincent. I'm a writer and researcher based in Manila. My undergraduate degree is in language and literature, and I'm fascinated by this course mainly because my current research fixation is on the topic of risk, agency, the post-planetary, and what may be presumed as density or as stand-in for a frictional force at once social and material contained within a topological space. Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thank you. No, it's great to have you here as well. Yeah, your research sounds really fascinating. So hopefully, I don't know, we can find out more about it as the course goes on. But yeah, thanks for being here. And I think is that it? There are some people with their camera off. If any of you want to introduce, or are they duplicates? I'm quite confused because
Andrew is a duplicate. I don't think Denise has gone.
I think we've had Denise introduced. Yeah, so we've had Zenobio, Denise, Eric. Is Eric introduced? But I mean, if you don't want to, that's absolutely. Oh, we have had Eric. Yeah, sorry.
I have.
My apologies. Yeah, fine. Okay, I think so. That's everyone. So yeah, great. Thank you so much for all introducing yourselves. Again, yeah. I think it's the perfect set of thinkers and people from different practices, and yeah, I was hoping beforehand that I would be learning, a ton out of this, and again, it's selfish because I want to get as much out of this as anyone else. But now I'm sure I will. So this is really good. So thank you so much, everyone, for introducing and letting me know who you are. I know that with seminars like this, particularly online as well, it can be a bit of a drag to get stuff going. But yeah, you guys were perfect. So thanks for that as well. Okay, cool. So let's just get into it. So I will present just so we have some some material to get our teeth into. But like I said before, if you want to interject or ask a question, or you're just bored of hearing me talk and you want to have a break or whatever, please interrupt at any time. Honestly, that completely fine. So without further ado, is the screen share still working?
You'll have to reshare again.
Okay, here we go. Nice. Oh, cool. Now it's gone into that view where I can see everyone as well. So that's perfect. Very good. Okay, cool. Right. So can you guys see the PowerPoint? Great. Thank you. Okay, right. So so I'm not sure if the course description PDF thing was shared around. Was it? Yeah, okay, great, cool. So with this first session, I wanted to talk about, I think as I called it in the PDF, visions of the future and also what can be achieved. And I guess right now, I just want to briefly, very broad strokes, go over the history of that and what I see as the history of it, and try and make an argument for a coherent structure in that history. My claim, and throughout my work, I make the claim quite a lot, is that we do now have more insight. I wouldn't say we're more insightful or wisdom, have more wisdom, or we're more potentially, particularly as individuals, more moral. But nonetheless, I think we have wider scope to think than previous generations. And what I mean by that is we have more concepts that can underwrite the ability of reaching further concepts. So that's just a methodological point. And, I guess from just interactions with people, I think that there's a big split of, I'd say roughly, people have very strong intuitions on this, but I'd say roughly 50-50, as some people just completely disagree with that claim. And if any of you do, that's completely fine. And it's really great to have those conversations. And are you a progressivist when it comes to ideas, or a perennialist? It's cool to have those conversations. So that's the methodological point out the way. I'm now going to launch into the grand narrative. So here we go. So I want to just start with framing this with some recent comments, because I guess the topic of human extinction has, in the past few decades, or at least since the Cold War, for obvious reasons, become practically urgent, such that it is now more philosophically explored. There's more attention paid to it. But so philosophers now spend more time talking about human extinction and worrying about it and its ethical consequences than they did, say, in the 1930s, 20s, 10s. So I wanted to frame this with this is one of the kind of major quotes that people point to when they're talking about the philosophy of human extinction. It comes from Derek Parfit, from his 1984 Reasons and Persons. So he makes this claim, and I think it's good because it lays out what we now know is at stake. And I'm going to hopefully then tell the story of how we worked out those stakes and how they all hang together. So he says, Earth will remain habitable for at least another 1 billion years, which is a prediction that actually remains more or less correct. Obviously, there's a variation, an interval of uncertainty, but a lot of scientists who study this, the predictions of the end of the biosphere range from, on the lower end, like 500 million years, on the higher end, some go a lot higher, but something like 1.5 billion. So that's the ballpark. So Anyway, that prediction's remained correct. So he says, Earth will remain habitable for at least another billion years. Civilization began only a few thousand years ago. If we do not destroy mankind, it's a shame that he uses mankind because the word humanity is perfect there, but regardless, these few thousand years may be only a tiny fraction of the whole of civilized human history. If we compare this possible history to a day, what has occurred so far is only a fraction of a second. Hence, all our highest achievements in sciences, arts, and moral philosophy will likely come in future centuries. This is why the destruction of mankind would be extremely bad, because it would frustrate all humanity's potential and foreclose all the pinnacles of achievement. So that's, just some very broad framing of, the way that philosophers currently talk about these things. But today, I want to, to try and tell this story of how there was the discovery of nature's kind of deep abiotic past that revealed this prospect that Parfit is talking to of a long opportunity-filled future, and also alongside the risks that might foreclose all of this promise. So let's get straight into the ancients. So here is Plato, and he's making some very, I guess what would the word be? He's making some claims, and these are not idiosyncratic claims for people writing around his time and for a long time afterwards. They're kind of, iconic in a sense. And he says that the past is of a long or infinite period of time, and then claims during that time, thousands upon thousands of peoples, and by peoples he means civilizations or societies, have existed, and by the same reckoning as many have been destroyed. Then he makes this further claim. Their social and political arrangements have been of every possible kind. Every possible permutation of moral and material betterment or decay has been passed through. And so this is a theme that we're probably going to, come back to again and again. And well, at least I always come back to it. It's a preoccupation of mine conceptually. But it's this philosophical assumption called the Principle of Plenitude, which was basically the way that people prior to a certain point in time thought about possibility. And basically what it says is that what is possible is what sometimes happens. So it defines possibility by pointing to the actual. So what is possible is what sometimes happens. What is necessitous is what always happens. What is impossible is what never happens. It defines possibility in that way. And it was the wide way of thinking about possibility for many centuries in the West. And it basically leads to these further claims that Plato is here articulating very clearly, is that if you think that what is possible is what sometimes happens, that in practice kind of collapses into what is possible is what has been known to happen. So further from that, it also leads to the claim that what is achievable is what has already been achieved. What is knowable has already been known. So it's also what, all the possible peaks and troughs of moral betterment and decay, to use Plato's words, have already necessarily been passed through. And obviously this is connected to the way that the ancient Greek worldview was often quite eternalistic. Time was thought to stretch infinitely far in front, but also infinitely far behind, which means that basically everything that can happen has already happened and will happen again. Again, that's another way of saying, that's just another way of talking about plenitude. So here's some good, similar claims by Aristotle, and I think these really get to the core of this issue. He says, probably each art and science has often been developed as far as possible and has again perished, not once, nor twice, nor occasionally, but infinitely often. So again, this idea that what is achievable, all that is achievable, has already been somewhere, somewhen achieved, even if not locally here and now, but in the past, because the past is so big, it has been. He says, within the multitude of years, everything has been found out. All possible achievements and inventions are within the experience of ages. So this leads to this interesting claim that inquiry or philosophical investigation, scientific investigation, is attempting to, in his words, supply defects in recall. Similarly, being better people or creating a better world or maximizing value, however you want to put it, is just returning to elder maxim or returning to elder peaks. So this connects to the kind of Aristotelical kind of ethics of Aristotle, is that being a good person is following a set precedent or a set series of behaviors, and that a good person is just that. It's just the person that is good, which is something to keep in mind. So yeah, everything that is achievable has been achieved. The peaks of human achievement lie in the past. All we can do is return to them. And if we forget them or destroy them, they will be rediscovered again in the future. So you see why this leads to this worldview where I guess it precludes a conceptual recognition that the kind of material conditions of humanity might become vastly better or be removed entirely. Everything, if there was something like absolutely materially different, a new, kind of a possible regime that, was so different from the current setup that Aristotle was looking around and seeing, then, he would be living in the ruins of some kind of mega civilization, but he didn't see that. So obviously those things weren't possible. So yeah, this is actually this kind of, I think, it lays out the whole thing. Aristotle says, if then life is a cycle, and a circle has neither beginning nor end, we should not be prior to those who lived in the time of Troy, nor they prior to us by being nearer to the beginning. Now, to translate that, he's basically saying that if everything that can happen has already happened and will happen again, time is a cycle, and based on the range of possibilities, because things recur, we actually can't really say whether we are before or after Troy. We might actually be, might be more accurate to say before if if this recurrence set is particularly small, which is, by our lights, now that we're kind of drenched in the idea of history being linear and progressive, is an incredibly strange thing to say. And then opening out into this question of the fate of humanity, the fate of the species. Here's Plato from The Statesman. He says the human race has often been destroyed in various ways. Now, if you're reading that and not really looking for these things, you might think, oh, Plato's talking about human extinction or failed states of civilization that are irreversible or permanent in the way that we now recognize them. But he's absolutely not, because these wipings out of civilization or humanity are nested within this cycle where humans always eventually return. There is this cyclical way of thinking about things. So yeah, just to kind of demonstrate that this way of thinking does continue into the Christian and the Islamic, the kind of medieval worldview. Here's late scholastic philosopher Caesar of Brabant saying the same things. So eternalism was not liked by the church for obvious reasons, because it doesn't fit with the Bible narrative. But nonetheless, this idea of plenitude, that if a good thing disappears here, it will later return, such that across time, the amount of value in the universe is invariant. That was nonetheless believed by the Christian world, regardless of this new introduction of a linear time based on the return of Jesus. So yeah, that leads on to this historical attitude that I call invariable value. So you can find it in the ancient Greeks. You can, as I just said, find it in medieval Christendom and Islamic thinking. I need to back up this claim far more, but I think you can find it in a lot of Chinese thinking as well. Again, I need to do more research to be able to back that up, but you can nonetheless find it. And it seems to be a dominant way of thinking historically, is that regardless of what humans do here and now, the amount of value in the wider universe basically kind of stays the same. Like if one of us messes up and does something really awful right here, right now, something some counteracting good will happen at another time. It was this kind of way of thinking about things. So here are some scholastic maxims that put this into relief. The first one, bonum diffusum sui, good is self-diffusing. The second one, ens est bonum convertentur, being and good are convertible terms. So it's this idea that kind of whatever is good, such that we can't really affect change on the whole. think we can skip over that stuff. Yeah, and so this is also an important point, is when it comes to temporality, attitudes to chronology. The Christendom, basically because early Christendom was an apocalyptic cult before it became institutionalized as this vast multi-generational church. There was this wide belief that we were living nearer to history's end than its beginning. The orthodox idea was that you had this 6,000 years, and that was the extent of the past, and most people thought that there was going to be a few centuries left. This was a widely held belief. So there's this kind of sense that we were living near the end, and everything that could be achieved has been achieved. The world isn't going to change massively. So yeah, this was a wide attitude in the medieval world. Now I want to explore how the beginnings of science and the scientific investigation of things change that. So in the next session, I want to talk a bit more. So next week, I want to talk a bit, actually the week after, because we're not doing next week, I want to talk a bit about how cosmology, astronomy changed things. But here we're going to touch a bit on cosmology later, but we're going to talk about geology for a bit here. So after the scientific revolution, which is sometime between 1500 and 1600, people started investigating the world, and everyone knows this story, etc., etc. So you might think that this might change that attitude to time, but it didn't immediately. That way of thinking about things cyclically and invariantly, ahistorically almost, stubbornly persisted. So here's this French author. I really like him because he's kind of both forwards thinking and also very backwards thinking in the same kind of character. So he was thinking about the Earth system and thinking about it in a very physicalistic sense, thinking about its history in a very physicalistic sense, which was very new at the time, but nonetheless had retained these kind of patterns of thought from the past. So he says here, we can estimate how many years our planet has been inhabited and how long a time it may still have inhabitants, which is it seems like a really forward-thinking claim. He's saying that a planet has a history, and there's a point of time when it has life and potentially intelligent life, and then a point in time in the future when it doesn't, which is very forward-thinking. But nonetheless, he then goes on to say, but whatever may be the fate of the Earth and of its inhabitants, there are reasons to believe that in the great multitude of globes contained in space, or in that infinite void, there will always be other terrestrial globes beside ours, which are inhabited by as many generations of men and animals. So again, this is the principle of plenitude, is that what is actual here kind of exhausts the space of possibility in some wider cosmic sense. So spatially, in the sense that he points to all these other planets have humans and animals on them, but also temporally is, this globe will eventually decay, but that's just part of this wider cycle that happens across globes. So I think that nicely demonstrates how those older forms of thought that I was just talking about previously did trickle down into the scientific worldview. Yeah, and this is just him saying that, if we dug down to the center of the globe, the remains of several superposed worlds, entire cities, durable monuments, and everything we observe on the surface, bones of men and animals, some petrified, others not, stones and marbles, inside which we would find all that occurs in our world. So this claim that the past is so big that everything that humans can achieve has already happened within it. And if we dug down to the center, we'd just be basically seeing loads of replays of civilization as we know it. Nothing above, perhaps potentially, nothing below in the sense of it irreversibly ending. Yeah, and just to also demonstrate how this mode of thinking actually, kind of persisted very far into, kind of the 19th century, not just people writing in the 17th. Here's Charles Lyell, who's seen as the founding figure in modern geology, but nonetheless he retained these very eternalistic intuitions. So he thought that the Earth was like this steady state system where everything that's happening now, again, exhausts the wider space of historical possibility. So you can't point to some possibility that is currently unrealized and say that it will become realized at a later date. Now, by this time, people were digging up dinosaur bones, and obviously that kind of presents an issue if you say that everything that is currently actual exhausts the possibility space of, a biosphere or a planet, because there are clearly no iguanodons stomping around. So he actually went as far to make the claim that, like the iguanas were just in the fullness of time just going to return at some point. The humans might disappear for a bit, but then they will return again. It's just this, in eternity, everything returns is basically his belief. Here's a nice, I love this image, I use it all the time. This is an illustrator, one of Lyell's friends, taking the piss out of that belief by illustrating some, kind of intelligent marine reptiles in the deep future. I think it's a charming image. So now I want to explore how, this building evidence, finding dinosaurs, digging down deep enough into primary strata is what they called it at the time, but finding strata of rock that are completely abiotic. So that means that there's no biological residue within them. That building evidence troubled this steady state, eternalistic, cyclical worldview of planetary history. And people eventually had to begin accepting that the planet has a history in a meaningful sense, which means that, again, there are possibilities within that history that aren't currently realized. There are possibilities that haven't yet been realized at all, etc., etc. As early as 1669, here's Nicholas Steno, also one of the kind of founding figures in geology. He was realizing this early, that based on this evidence of these strata that contain no life, we have to infer that there was a period of Earth history, he says, when animals and plants had not yet appeared. So again, this is what was troubling this elder worldview. Here's Georges Buffon, another one of my favorite Enlightenment scientists. He had this theory that planets are formed by a kind of asteroid hitting the sun and ejecting solar matter that then kind of cools down in space, gains a crust. As the crust cools, life emerges, but then eventually the whole thing cools down so much that life goes extinct. This is a very linear model of planetary history. I would make the claim that it's the first properly linear model of planetary history. However, Buffon also thought that it kind of just happens again and again in all the other star systems, such that he never made the further inference that there would be a point in time when the whole universe will have cooled down so much. You'd have to kind of wait for the Victorians for that claim. But nonetheless, there's a direction, there's an arrow to time here, which leads to people begin to make these claims around the 1800s, to link that up with humanity. Here's Henri Saint-Simon, who we might return to. He was an early socialist utopian thinker, pretty crazy, pretty nuts in a lot of ways, but is part of that tradition that leads to Marx. He says here, the existence of the human species is linked to that of the planet. It is directly dependent on it, so that geological considerations must necessarily serve as an introduction to the history of the species. The vast majority of authors in geology agree to conclude from their observations that the Earth was for a long time uninhabitable for humans as well as other terrestrial animals. And then he links this forward and says at some future time it will thus be uninhabitable again and the human species will die out. So, this was new stuff back then. People didn't normally say this kind of thing. And so this leads to this new idea, and again, it's more than an idea, it's like a kind of way of an attitude towards the world, which begins to acknowledge that in the large, from the perspective of the whole, the cosmos, whatever you want to call it, there could be large-scale variations in value. I think this has something to do with Leibniz in the early 1700s starts talking about possible worlds. And this is him kind of developing this idea that what is possible isn't necessarily rooted in things that are known to be actual, but just in concepts that have kind of internal logical coherence. So we can start talking about possibilities that have never been previously observed, aren't in the historical record, are beyond precedent. So this kind of opens up this space of history to there being possibilities in the future that no one has currently experienced or out beyond the record, right? Now this obviously, as we saw in the previous quote, opens up the possibility of a world without humans. No one's experienced that world by definition, but it's nonetheless conceptually, logically, internally coherent. So we can start talking about that as a possible world. Similarly, we can start talking about worlds that have far more value in them. Leibniz himself obviously thought, well, yeah, he famously thought that we live in the best of all possible worlds, but nonetheless, he created the kind of conceptual, logical machinery required to think about a better one. And so because of this widening of the space of possibility, history begins to become meaningful. The German historian Reinhard Koselleck makes the claim, I think very persuasively, that our idea of history that we currently have as, not chained to some kind of God-given track and filled with contingency and also open-ended in that, kind of flowing on from that contingency. He says that that emerges sometime in the 18th century. And I agree. So here's Marquis de Condorcet, and he was kind of the apotheosis of the Enlightenment optimist. He thought that humanity was infinitely perfectible. So he here is making these interesting claims, saying that, if we can predict the laws of nature, why can't we apply that knowledge to what he calls here the future destiny of mankind? And then makes the claim that the progress of the sciences secures the progress of the art of instruction, which again accelerates in its turn that of the sciences, and this reciprocal influence, the action of which is incessantly increased, must be ranked in the number of the most prolific and powerful causes of the improvement of the human race. So like I said, he was a fast optimist. He was writing in a time whose confidence hadn't yet been knocked by what happened in ensuing centuries. But nonetheless, he had this very powerful and at the time very novel idea that the material conditions of humanity and therefore its lot in the world could radically change and also become radically better. And so, yeah, here he is linking that, however, into this wider physicalistic picture of nature, where he says, humanity will continue improving, again, massive optimist, but he nonetheless says it will continue doing this, at least while the Earth retains its situation in the system of the universe, and the laws of this system shall neither effect upon the globe a general overthrow, nor introduce such changes as would no longer permit the human race to preserve. So again, interesting thinking for the time. So now I want to talk about how this. Oh,
one short question,
yeah,
really quickly,
yeah,
about. I think it was 2 slides before, and I also wrote it in the chat. It sounded like as if kind of like a model was presented there, which is basically just, okay, you have positive feedback cycle in the progression of human history, but without any kind of possible regression, but only ever, okay, it's only ever getting better. And then okay, what exactly feedbacks on what is then a question of detail, but it's only ever getting better. Therefore, it's only also ever getting better, but without regressions of any kind whatsoever. Is that basically what this is about?
So I don't think, I think that claim is absolutely wrong. But it's so yeah, like I said, he was just this overpowering optimist. So what's interesting is that he did actually give a not necessarily physical, but at least sociological causation behind this progress that he was positing as irreversible. It wasn't just that, oh, there's this that's just the arc of history. Him giving that feedback thing is quite interesting because it's him trying to actually say this upward, inevitable upward lift that I'm describing, I'm actually going to try and give it a cause. So, you know, that's quite interesting. But nonetheless, I think he's interesting at that position in time. It was actually somewhat innovative to just to even make the claim that the conditions of humanity might become far better. It's possible through actual physical means to improve them. Now, I think that his then further claim that this is necessary and cannot become retrograde or be regressed, that's probably some residue of, you know, kind of the Christian teleology that was still just how most people thought about history. So does that make sense?
It was more like also like an understanding question, if I kind of like got this right. But because I feel like in a lot of like maybe in like popular culture or like popular discourse images, like some rough sketch of this, I think in maybe not in like this accelerative force, but in this, okay, yeah, there is this steady progression of history, like new technology, new sciences, which will make new of this good stuff possible and more, and maybe like some and I mean that like historically, okay, there have been, of course, some of these positive feedback circles with like massive explosions in progress and possibilities, but also like regressions, and like that these new explosions of possibilities have opened up new other regressions and other unforeseen problems. And yeah, but I feel like it doesn't seem to be that foreign to us, this kind of only positive feedback. I think it's more common than we might think still today, kind of.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I guess just from doing, you know, spending your time trying to think about how ideas change across time, yeah, one strong belief that I have is that, you know, as I was talking about earlier, like the stubbornness of ways of thinking. Often, yeah, we necessarily right now will be containing kind of residue of elder conceptual regimes that by the future's light, hopefully if there is a future, right, will find kind of strange and regressive within a new conceptual scheme. So yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of people do still think there is, you know, regardless of you know, whatever postmodernity achieved, there is still a lot of thinking that claim, you know, would make a stronger claim that there's something necessary about you know, uplift, or however you want to call it. I think one of the, and you know, we'll explore this later on, but like you know, one of the insights of the 20th century, and it can lead in lots of different ways, but it was the realization that you know, this kind of expansion of material physical power obviously is a double-edged sword, and unlocking certain certain techniques can create not just you know, kind of loss or downward curve, again, however you want to think about it, but can also, you know, destroy this whole thing entirely, right? Obviously, nuclear weapons. So, but that wasn't an insight that people had back then. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe as a last comment, maybe what would be most prone and like as a professional discipline to this kind of thinking would like still be economics, and like even some parts of environmental economics, which say like basically, okay, yeah, let just climate change happen. In a few decades, we will have much bigger technological possibilities. So it's much more it's cheaper for us to then deal with climate change. And like that kind of thinking is still completely embedded in there. That like, yeah, growth is like the thing that isn't questioned whatsoever. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are you thinking of any kind of examples of people like along that line of thinking in particular?
Nordhaus, especially Nordhaus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with him. Or is it
he has, I don't remember his first name, but he got like the Nobel Prize in economics, and is like pretty famous for some pioneering work in like getting environmental economics a little bit more mainstream, but that his models of, okay, the likely consequences of, let's say, like 5 or 6 degree increase in temperature in Celsius is just laughable. Like it's really laughable if you compare it to IPCC predictions and stuff. And that there are stuff like, okay, hey, economic activities that happen inside of rooms and of houses will not be affected by climate change. Like assumptions like this are part of this. And but yeah, it's like the perfect model of this. Okay, hey, let's just like growth is like the ultimate thing that will just happen. And yeah, like this kind of positive feedback accelerative dynamic.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't made that connection at all. But yeah, I know. Again, I think that there is so much inertia in thinking, and I think if you're making a bet on a contingent process, but acting like it's not, it's potentially an issue, right? Yeah, is that what you're saying? Yeah. No, I agree. So yeah, I mean, does anyone else have any other kind of comments on that point, or shall I kind of get on with this story that I'm trying to tell here? I guess it's now moving into the Anthropocene stuff. But if anyone has any comments at this point, please do go ahead. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
In the book, in your book, in the beginning, I was also skeptical about this concept of value, because it's kind of a blurry yet. What is exactly this value that should be conservated or keep it, or something like, or kept, or something like this, or else something like this value could be revised and constructed. But in the progress I was doing in the book while reading, I was at the end convinced that it was not exactly like this, that the future would be for sure better and something like this. But the thing about the trying to mitigate the risk would be like not because the humans will be necessarily better and have better values, but could have better values, because without it we wouldn't know if it would be better or worse, like, at all. So it is like because I was I was skeptical about this, because like I live in Brazil, and I live among violence and corruption and something like that. So yeah, like for me was, what kind of human value is this? Because what I live with is with corruption, violence, and stuff like that. So it was very hard for me to have these conceptions, because they are very Western, they are very English or European and something like that. So yeah. So so in the end, I was okay. So we to construct better values, we have to exist. It's like the point is, I guess, is the possibility of it, not actually that we will have it, but we could have it, we might have it.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really brilliant comment, and really rich. I guess there's a lot to kind of pick out there, but yeah, I think that's my belief, is that things are not going to get better, but they could. And so insofar as there are intelligent beings in this biosphere, maybe in this kind of galaxy, maybe further beyond, who knows, that's an open question. Insofar as they are intelligent in the sense that we are discursive, rational, etc., imbued with some sense of right and wrong, I think that there's that possibility of correcting previous error. That's a thing that we humans tend to do quite uniquely, I would argue. Obviously there are myriad other intelligences, and the direction of travel is constantly kind of going, humanity losing its uniqueness and its uniqueness cognitively in lots of domains, but nonetheless, this ability to correct past error in some meaningful way, I think that is something that is, something that we can do. So I think that, yeah, as long as there are people around, persons around, there is the potential for things to get better. And now that's what we should be protecting, is that potential. We shouldn't be protecting, the physical, biological human as just a, kind of a germline or a species or whatever, because it's not necessarily that, but it's that potential for improvement. Now, people that thought that improvement was going to happen regardless, that's, I think, as problematic a worldview as as they get in many ways, because in the same way that I guess we were looking at these kind of theistic things when I was talking about invariable value, one of the troubles I find with that is that, and they call this theodicy, this kind of theological argument that what's going on in the world is always right regardless and no matter what. That theodical kind of worldview can basically erode motivation to organize or make the world a better place, however you want to, however you might construe that being being possible. It abrades motivation because if you think that the world is just as good as it can be anyway, it's in this like optimal state, then why would you be motivated to want to make the world a better place? Now, I think the same thing, that same kind of abrasion of motivation to kind of actually act happens with those very kind of necessitarian progressivism. So I think that attitude, can also create this sense of nonchalance when it comes to the actual genuine injustice in the world that you point to, right? So yeah, I think that there's an echo there again historically, is that there's this kind of Panglossian theodical view of the world also can end up having similar practical consequences regarding action when it comes to these very kind of teleological, the world will be better regardless. And as Eric pointed out, right, it's, it can, we still see that in various and the example of environmental economics is a very adroit one, right? We see it there. So yeah, 100%. And I guess, at the beginning I was trying to kind of eke this out, is like all of these visions are like, could happen, or maybe like vanishingly unlikely to happen, but it's the stress on the could, and so that's like we should preserve that potential for those better worlds to happen, but something could go vastly wrong with a failsafe on a nuclear kind of warhead tomorrow, and things could cascade very badly, and then that's the end for humanity. That could happen at any time, and it's this contingency. That's the thing. That's a theme that I want to continue touching on. So yeah, I mean, does that kind of I guess speak to what you were trying to kind of articulate there? Yeah, cool, thanks. Yeah, and all, but like brilliant comment. Thank you so much. Yeah. So yeah, if anyone else has, if you guys just want to go to conversation now, or I can kind of pace ahead with saying what happens next, completely up to you guys. What up to you. If anyone wants to say anything at this point, please do.
And hi, Thomas. I was thinking also related to perhaps to this issue on the theological worldviews. About, I mean, cyclical worldviews, they are a lot similar in that they seem to justify everything that can happen, will happen again. Everything that is happening is okay, it's natural because it has already happened, it will happen again. And I was just thinking, how much do you see that it is all that it is widespread today? I mean, because I had never thought about it in this sense, to these readings, that they were so much entrenched in the history of Western civilization, and and that because I was thinking about sci-fi histories, like there is Asimov's Nightfall, in which during the, I mean, this is sort of a spoiler, but I mean, during the story, they just find out that there is a cycle that everything's going to burn and everything will come back again, and that has always happened. And I always thought that was so ingenious, but then reading back to this to all this tradition, it sort of starts looking that it is not ingenious. It is just some old trend, some ancient trend in our ways of thinking, and that it comes back again and again. And even though we are in a moment of criticizing this linear progress story of Western thinking, it still seems that even in common sense, sometimes, even talking about politics, people will say, yeah, but these things, they are cycles, you know. People like to think in this model. So I was thinking how much it is still ingrained, and how much all the story that we are trying to tell of modern history is still going on, and how much really changed people's ways of thinking about these things.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I guess I would say to that is that well, a few things. So I think that in terms of this, like the ways people have thought and how they changed across time, particularly in the West when it comes to this, is that as our scope of thinking about this human story links into the wider universe, as our knowledge of that wider universe has, you know, sequentially become larger and larger. For example, you know, when people in the 1700s used the word universe, they were mostly meaning the solar system. Like, some people did say, you know, were completely aware of the fact that, like, these other stars probably had planets around them. That claim has been made since Copernicus. But nonetheless, that was what people meant by universe, was often just the solar system. You know, it was only kind of really in the 1930s that, like, there was actual proof that, like, there was this, like, wider galaxy beyond our solar system made up of other, you know, stars. And then only in the 1990s that we've actually been able to prove, you know, that there are exoplanets. Like, these other stars do have other planets around them. So, like, our sense of just the cosmos has completely grown, right? That's an important thing to keep in mind here. You know, there were people thinking in terms of the Milky Way. Thomas Wright, Kant talks about these things, but it was only really in the 1930s that really started to become part of the discussion. So anyway, so the wider universe has just kind of continued to get bigger and bigger. And now this, I guess, to go back to the Troy thing with Aristotle, right? This sense of the kind of set of possibilities and the kind of idea of the space of actuality within which they can happen, you know, it's changed, and the kind of scope of repetition, so the place where, you know, this eternal return happens, has got bigger and bigger. So where previously it was, you know, this planet. So for the Lyell example, it was that things will repeat on this planet. By the Victorian times, widely, people weren't kind of thinking in that way. They were thinking there was some irreversibility within the, you know, the kind of the planetary system based on the dying out of the sun. But then they would say, but that system will repeat because other suns will be born, other humanities will grow on them, etc., etc. That was a really widely held belief around that time. So, you know, Darwin has this letter, actually, Charles Darwin has this letter where he's, like, getting really upset about the death of the sun and how that means that all these, like, aeons of human progress and, you know, all these themes that he loved will end up in nothing. And people have pointed to that as, like, you know, Darwin was, like, very aware of, like, this kind of irreversible potential terminal endpoint to human history. But then later on in the letter, he says, but we won't get a fresh start until this planetary system is returned to red hot gas. What that means is he thinks that, you know, eventually it will collide with a new star, it'll become a kind of red hot cloud of gas, and then it will condense and become a solar system again, and presumably humanity will evolve again. And he's said similar claims elsewhere that if you wiped out all mammals, the reptiles would eventually become something like us again. So that cycle, do you see what I mean by this cycle of recurrence? Like as the kind of space of actuality that we know has become bigger, that's kind of the theater within which we play this cyclical narrative. So now, present age, you see these kind of similar ideas when it comes to, you know, kind of questions of the actual, like cosmology at a scale of the universe. People talk of, is the universe open or closed? If it's like infinite, if it is infinite, then, you know, everything happening here will happen again and is probably happening concurrently right now. So it's on that scale. But then you can also point to, you know, the kind of many world stuff in quantum theory, modal realism, this kind of, you know, analytical philosophy that says that, you know, kind of possibilities are real in some sense. You know, there are plenty of places where this idea still remains with us. And I would say it's actually, in terms of kind of, you know, what is actually true, right? Like, it's still a massive open question. We're talking about the biggest questions in cosmology, astrobiology, all of these, you know, fields of science. So we don't know if this idea of recurrence is true and still on the table as a fact. But what's happened historically is when previously that was the only game in town, we now have at least some good facts to the contrary, that perhaps there is irreversibility in some meaningful sense. You know, so basically, I think that regardless of your kind of credence in either of those two large-scale world models, if there's at least a non-zero probability that everything that's happening here now will never happen again, such that what we do next actually matters in some sense, and if we disappear irreversibly and that's it for, you know, at least intelligence in this region of the universe, then it kind of matters. So if there's a non-zero probability that that is actually the way things hang together, then I think we need to act accordingly. And just as a final note, you know, people in astrobiology talk about this. You know, what is the probability of humanoid intelligence kind of re-evolving or evolving elsewhere? And Simon Conway Morris, you know, this kind of really brilliant paleo kind of evolutionary biologist, he's very strong of the opinion that there was something inevitable evolutionarily about humanity. He makes this argument, but he says, but we don't know this for sure. So like, we better be careful when it comes to like slinging nukes around and stuff like that. So like, I think it's just a non-zero probability thing, is that, you know, everything might actually be kind of happening here and now for the first time ever, and potentially also the last if we muck it up. And I think that that is a lesson for action. It could be true that there are, you know, billions of other humans existing on billions of other planets, or that this will just recur, or if we die tomorrow and don't take the rest of the biosphere with us, that something simian humanoid will eventually just re-evolve in the next, you know, 500 million years or something, and then it will all just happen again. We don't know the answers to those questions, but it's the non-zero probability thing. So yeah, that's how I kind of respond to that. But again, absolutely brilliant question. Yeah, and thanks for asking.
So I have another one, if you don't mind. It's going back a little bit to something maybe along the lines of what Zenobio asked, and I wonder a little bit about the so in this shift towards seeing value as something that can possibly be increased in the future, what image of the human is sort of at work there? Because I imagine it's slightly different between different thinkers, and I also think there's sort of, I think when you talk about its possibility, you seem to have sort of an idea of a very sort of almost functional idea of the human, but that's certainly not what many of the sort of empirical image of the human that these authors are talking about is certainly not that. And within what they are referring to, there's presumably, and I'm going to make a presumption now, and that's sort of that there is sort of a great deal of racism and so on built in, and sexism and so on. So I wonder sort of then, is there a risk of sort of conflation here, that we sort of put in that we sort of retroactively put something into the word human that they didn't put there, and sort of what they actually, the idea that they had is not necessarily what is being ascribed to them, and just building on that. So that would be one question. What might be the consequences of this? Because to some extent, if the possibility of realizing a much greater sort of amount of value in the future, it seems that the initial conditions for that would matter a great deal. And if history already has foreclosed a great number through, for instance, colonialism and I mean a lot of other violent events have foreclosed a lot of these possibilities, what happens to the status of value? This is not necessarily to say that we are sort of cursed entirely and for all time, but I think there is something disquieting there, sort of that the ways in which the world can get better seems to be somehow constrained, and is sort of based on that. It's sort of, maybe I'm jumping a little bit now, but sort of is sort of a greater, the realization or actualization of more value, is that something that is to be discovered, or something that inheres in the world that is then discovered and we sort of find, or is it something that actually depends on the initial conditions, that sort of if from the sort of a period time of discovery of this as a possibility? It's a complicated line of questions. I'm sorry, but it's sort of I'm trying to sort of wrap my mind around what's going on here.
Yeah, no, again, I mean, so I'm just from the get-go, I'm not going to be able to provide any answers there. It's just, it's going to be responses, particularly on the, like, do we find value? Is it something out there, or is it this other process? Like, again, that's a massive question. I haven't made my mind up on it. I think that, we should have all the options on the table for that, but that's why, again, I want to have these conversations. I think this is such a rich and brilliant question. So yeah, to talk to the first part of your question. So yeah, what is the image of the human in these earlier thinkers that I'm pointing to? And you're absolutely right. Obviously, there's a lot of racism, a lot of misogyny. That's just kind of, you have to put the hazmat on when you go back into the past and read these people, because you're going to find that stuff. But yeah, and I do think, and I get, I know that you're interested in sellers, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay. So yeah, I do think that it has got a lot to do with this process that you talk of kind of unbinding normativity or intelligence from any kind of parochial image of it. Like, that has to be a historical process that happens through correction and revision, and with the massive potential for error and erring and dead ends, and also retrogression and all of that stuff. But it has to be a historical process. You can't just reach the absolute like a bullet from a gun, right? Like, so I think, yeah, but one of the things that, and this links into this possibility stuff that I wasn't intending to go on so much about, because it gets very abstract and technical, and I do have a tendency to go on about it too much, so I didn't want to get too much into it. But and I did kind of hint to it as like the Aristotelian, the Thomist kind of view, and this is really like kind of destroying a lot of detail and resolution, but those were kind of the two major thinkers in the Western tradition of ethics up until kind of the modern period, right? Their view is this kind of aritological virtue ethics one, and it's really interesting kind of trying to wrap your head around some of the things they say. Like, it's almost, because it was almost like a non-normative theory. It wasn't that like what is right is based on a choice that an agent makes between different options. It was that the good person is the good person no matter what, and the bad person is the bad person no matter what. So it was almost like, I think, to touch back onto that distinction that I think you're trying to make between an empirical image of the human and then one that's kind of disarticulated from any empirical image. Their idea of what was good was kind of constrained in the same way that plenitude constrains possibility to actuality. Their idea of what was good was constrained to just what is good behavior, what is virtuous behavior. It wasn't this idea that there's some potential kind of how would I say it? Some kind of thing that we could isolate as an actual source of value in the world and then go about maximizing it, which is the utilitarian view, or the deontological view, which is the agent has this kind of free decision between different options. But that requires this understanding of possibility that is unbound from precedent, which requires the disbinding of plenitude or the definitions of possibility that come from it. So again, I know that's like super abstract, probably didn't make any sense, but I hope that, does that kind of speak to the first part of your question a little bit?
Yeah, no, it does. I also think there's a question, sort of there's certainly a way of sort of reconstructing an argument and sort of finding something here, but there's another sort of thing I guess we can do as a sort of a historian of ideas to sort of recapitulate what they were saying and sort of to articulate the sort of the trajectory of this idea, and I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around where we are doing which, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, again, like we don't really know, like, because we're in the midst of this ongoing and unfinished historical process. So yeah, 100%. When I'm reconstructing these things and trying to say this bit's bad, Aristotle's saying that we lived before Troy is bad, but this other person who's like, maybe there will be a possible world where there are no humans because the sun has kind of turned down enough that it's refrigerated the planet. Me saying that that's good and that's bad, that's totally revisable, and I've revised my own positions on a lot of these things. So yeah, no, not just within this wider historical process, but within my own just thinking about these things, it's always shifting. And so yeah, but yeah, to touch on your second point, I think that's absolutely fascinating point to make. And I completely hadn't thought of it, but this idea of initial conditions and this, I guess, the lock-in of certain states and what that means for wider history and our kind of normative or evaluation of it, however you want to say. Yeah, that's again, huge question. I don't have any answers, but my responses would be that, yeah, I agree. I think, history is, if history, and this is why this irreversibility claim is important, because in a universe that does obey plenitude in a strong sense, people have made the claim that means that nothing matters. So there's a paper, it's called Infinitarian Paralysis, paper by Nick Bostrom. So he's a very committed utilitarian. He notices this thing in an open, infinite universe. Utilitarianism kind of doesn't go through, it doesn't work, because within that universe, everything and its opposite is always concurrently happening, such that the total amount of value, the aggregate value, just cannot change. So the example he uses is, why stop a tragedy here and now when I know that it's going to happen, infinitely many times, infinitely many other places, and is concurrently doing exactly that. If you're motivated by actually creating a material change on what's going on within the universe, it again abrades your motivation to do anything to stop that tragedy. And people have, so to actually touch back on this analytical idea of modal realism, people have noticed the same thing in modal realism. So after David Lewis said that kind of actuality is an indexical claim, all possibilities exist equally, we just happen to be in this region of the whole space, that's how you explain actuality. It's a similar thing to the many worlds hypothesis, blah, blah, blah. Ethicists notice something really troubling about that, is that if every possibility exists equally, then again, why save the drowning child in the pool? Because the reasons above, right? And there's a paper with exactly that title. It's like, if modal realism is true, why save the drowning child? Which is, kind of a hilarious analytical philosophy paper title. But yeah, so this is why, and again, as an overarching theme that we could continue talking about potentially, is this is why this idea of irreversibility, so that history has these kind of lock-in states where the system. So there's a really technical way of thinking about this called ergodicity. Comes from physics. So an ergodic system is one wherein there is actually a genuine irreversibility. The system doesn't just kind of move around all different points. As many. It's a very hard thing to describe, but like it doesn't just move around all the other points. It has places where it can move into a point in that system and then can't move out. So there's an irreversibility in that sense, or it means that it can't go back to certain points in the system. So this is, I think, a way of thinking. You can think about history in that way, and that insight applied to history is, I think, well, I mean, I think we're still in the process of kind of learning what that means, right? So yeah, if everything that's happening right here, right now, is happening for the first time and is open-ended and contingent, then we are in that kind of system. Now, to link that to the final point is, what does that mean for the tangible atrocities and tragedies of human history? Well, I guess it means that they have happened and that's it, and there's nothing we can do about it. They're, I would say, unforgivable. There is no universal ethical system that I would find sensible that would find a forgiveness for them. That's why it's one of the things I've always thought I don't really fully understand. Brandom, I'm sure, Carl, you're kind of familiar with Robert Brandon's work on history. It's one of the things I'm like, I surely don't understand what he's saying when he says that we should kind of forgive all the errors of the past, because how can you forgive some of the atrocities, right? So yeah, I don't know. I think that they happened. It's the most sensible way of thinking about them as irreversibly locked into our history. And I mean, this Parfit guy that I opened with, he makes this interesting claim at some point when he says that, if humanity does achieve these kind of big wins, these grand futures, then we would then live in a universe where the previous atrocities of history are still unforgivable. They haven't been made up for, but at least we live in a universe that some people might be happy that it existed in the first place. I can't remember. He makes a much finer point on it, and it sounds far more acceptable the way he says it. But yeah, I mean, I'll try and find the quote and send it to you, but it's an interesting one. But yeah, no, I think that's a really fantastic question, a really fantastic one. I guess just being really kind of down to earth, commonsensical, not philosophical or clever about this, is that if it is the case that bad things in the past mean that we shouldn't be motivated to do good things in the future, there just must be something wrong with that. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I guess that's my general attitude to this kind of thinking.
Yeah, no, just further to that, I think, I mean, if looking for, it raises for me the question of sort of what would be the sort of, one could get into some perhaps disturbing sort of justifications for pursuing what one thought would be a big win with that kind of reasoning as well, right? Mm-hmm. That, okay, we can do this and that, and if that increases our chances of reaching a so-called big win, and I mean, yeah. I was going to say something else, but maybe it will return to me. Yeah.
Can I follow that with a naive question? Because it's really related, but I have a hard time understanding it. You are talking about the point of view of morality and the definition of human and stuff like that. But I think what is absent in the argument, and I really like to hear something about, is the notion of betterment or good. I understood from what you said that, for example, we forgive the tragedy or atrocities of the past. So that means for me that we have already set of values, invariable values, that discriminate between acts of human beings through history. So what is this point of view in the first place? For example, when Plato talks about the height of some civilizations, he specifically is talking about knowledge and philosophy. For him, that's the height of civilization, as I understand. So that's his good. Okay, with becoming modern toward ontology or cosmology, or becoming aware of our contingency and not necessity through nature. What we achieved in the sense of defining a good in that sense, not even human, but what is good in that sense? Because is good what is good for human as human? You understand my question, right?
Yeah, a good question. Again, I don't have any like set opinions on this. So I mean, what is the good? I would instantly say we don't know. We don't know yet, and it will continue being an open question, you know, potentially for indefinitely. But like we have on the table now various different ideas of what is the good, and one of them is to not impose your good on other people, to basically underwrite conditions in which there's as much like plurality and kind of I guess I mean obviously the word has been trashed, but liberty for different people to pursue that. I think that's an important thing to preserve, is the ability for people to even decide what's good, right? That's kind of, I guess, what we were talking about earlier, is that Zenobio's point I think he made, where it's like people have to be around for that process to even happen. Now, you make the other interesting claim is that, you know, is what's good for humans? Now, I would say no, but there is an important, you know, animal suffering matters, right? I think that you know, I think that that's the case. So there's a distinction that some philosophers make that I think is quite persuasive, is that there are moral agents and then moral patients. A lot of animals, some animals might be moral agents, right? But like most of them probably, you know, kind of, I wouldn't think that a factory farm chicken is a moral agent, but nonetheless it is a moral patient, right? So it's like good matters. So what it's going through matters. And so I think that their lot should also be improved, but that doesn't mean that they're agents in the sense that, you know, if there were no moral agents around, there wouldn't be any kind of motive force to basically uplift or improve the lot of those patients that are around. So I guess that's one of the ways that I would answer the kind of is what's good for humans question. I'm not sure if it's a very persuasive or a good answer, but it's just what I have right now. I'm trying to think, what was there other points that you made? I mean, did that touch on anything or most things? Let me know. Cool. So yeah, there was something I wanted to say to Carl's point. What was it? Again, like you forgot what you were going to say. I just forgot what I was going to say. But what was the final thing that you said? Because there was something I wanted to return to about that.
I think it was just if you think about past events as unforgivable, but then you move on and sort of at least sort of it's good now, you could potentially use that to justify atrocities in the present.
Yes. Fantastic question. Right. So also to actually briefly touch on something Arman said, I definitely don't think that any atrocity in the past is forgivable. I really don't. So if you thought that's what I was saying, that's not what I was saying.
No.
Yeah. But then to answer Carl's question, so this is the criticism of some of this kind of long-term grand future stuff, is that you know, if it's possible that humanity could do this amazing, huge, cosmically brilliant thing rather than just kind of the good stuff that we might have done right now. You know, obviously there's a lot of bad stuff as well. We've, you know, kind of caused the mass extinction event, but like humans have done some pretty good stuff, right? But if we could do that on a cosmic scale in the future, that means there's so much value, and that means that you know, justifies almost any action in the present. Now, I think that that's like a mischaracterization of some of these forms of thinking, all of the sensible ones, because I think, well, like for a start, a lot of the people that are interested in this kind of stuff, they are very sensitive to the question of moral uncertainty. So the idea that, you know, we aren't, like, say you have credence in a normative theory, and then there are ways of kind of implementing that in the world. and you might have different credences about the ways of implementing it, but you shouldn't have full credence in your normative moral theory that's dictating that above, if you see what I mean. So we should kind of be uncertain about what we think is normative in this sense anyway. So that's one thing, is that, that's one thing, is being sensitive to that, I think, is a good thing. The second thing is that what we're trying to preserve, I guess, when we're talking about these things, and this is, I guess, what I was talking about earlier, when it's like, I'm not interested in conserving the human as a, as like a biological entity. I'm interested in preserving what the human is in the kind of unbound sense of, a moral agent capable of correcting itself, etc., all the stuff we've been talking about. Now, also what we should be preserving is option value, so the ability to choose between different alternatives and options. I think that, and to go back to this freedom claim, liberty claim, whatever that I made earlier, I think that underwrites that, is that we should be preserving agency or freedom or the ability to choose, right? So we really, really shouldn't be doing or even beginning to entertain big atrocities in the present, because, as you pointed out earlier, history, if it is irreversible or ergodic, non-ergodic would be the right one to say, then these things are just etched forever into that history. So there's just, don't do that kind of thing. Don't use infinite value to justify atrocity. We shouldn't be going anywhere near that. And then, as a final claim, a lot of the ways that philosophers traditionally get around these kind of questions is saying that we just have these deontological constraints. We just don't do certain things, say I care vastly about some future state and think it's hugely valuable, but that requires, all of these silly thought experiments that would require murdering XYZ number of people to manifest it. There's just a deontological constraint there that we shouldn't be, murdering people for infinite value. I just don't think that, this is just removed from real action. It's kind of philosophy thought experiment space. Yeah, I don't know. Does that kind of I don't know. Do you find any of those persuasive as responses? Because it's a problem, right? And I recognize it as one.
Yeah, no, I think for me it's probably best to keep it as a problem and keeping it open for now, and trying to sort of work with it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree. That's yeah, 100%. I think that's what we ought to be doing. But yeah. Yeah. So any other comments right now? Anyone got any other questions? Anything to say? Yeah.
I suppose just one quick thing. Maybe this is falling outside of the conversation you were just having, but when it comes to this question of value with respect to former atrocities and so on, I couldn't help but think of the way in which the UK tends to have this kind of ceremonial remembrance of the First World War, and it seems totally deracinated from the actual real thing that happens. Or the kind of real episode that it refers back to, right? It's this performative gesture of remembrance, which, actually it would be quite prescient to remember that in the First World War, loads and loads of people died because of careless decisions by people in positions of power. That would be quite a pertinent message to kind of convey in this very moment that we're living in now. And yet, it's patently not what the kind of objective or what the kind of value of this ceremonial thing where everybody wears poppies in that at a certain time of the year is. And so I guess this was kind of leading me to think in terms of perhaps our conception of values should be complex rather than simple with respect to time, right? So in that sense, our immediate values should be both historically sensitive and also future oriented in a way that's that has a kind of thicker sense of what value means rather than a kind of simpler sense of harm principle or whatever. And similarly that there's other kind of notions of complexity of value also in terms of how do we hierarchically arrange values and stuff like that. I think because we can have like universal values like the harm principle, but then their universality in the sense that everybody in principle agrees to them is not the same as a universality of like, this is the most important and highest value in all cases, and it wins against all other considerations. So that was just like maybe some additional thoughts on the question of value.
Yeah. As a fellow UKer, I agree with you on there's something so troubling about the kind of and yeah, sorry if this isn't relevant to anyone who doesn't live in the UK, but like and I don't know how much of this spills beyond this sceptred aisle, right? But like this kind of there's something very troubling about this already, comparing the COVID like kind of disaster to previous conflicts, in this sense of that you can already see the narrative forming of like, oh, but it was necessary, and again it's kind of for me I see that as like a residual form, like and pernicious form a residual and pernicious form of like theodical thinking, is that like this had to have happened for our whatever thing the kind of people that are talking about this are going to be enjoying down the track. They'll be like, oh, but we had to do this and these people made these, because when you start talking about sacrifice, and I think that's the salient thing here, is it's sacrifice, it implies that it was necessitous and also right in some sense, that you had to make that sacrifice for the kind of consequence to all flow from that. And I find that it's because again it was contingent. The way that the course that this took in the UK and also globally, it didn't have to happen that way, right? I agree. I can't remember what you made a further point I wanted to touch on, but I can't remember what it was. If you want to throw it back at me.
Yeah, I can say again, it was just that our values should be kind of complex in the sense of like time, and also with respect to other kind of considerations of context, I guess.
And so I mean, I think that's that's why thinking in the long term, or encouraging because I think our vocabularies for thinking in the longer term are massively underdeveloped, and also our ethics of thinking in the long term are also massively underdeveloped, such as why the problem that Carl points to is like a live and active problem, right? I think that it's massively underdeveloped. That's one of the reasons I find it interesting. But like thinking in the longer term, it's a lot of our current problems are based on short-termism and like kind of priority. So I guess this is one of the points that the piece I put in the reading for this week, the Richard Fisher one on I think it's called like Humanity Stuck in Short-Termism. I think that piece really powerfully makes this point that a lot of aspects of the climate crisis, a lot of aspects of capitalism are caused by this kind of short-termist thinking. So this is why I think the case can be made for thinking, trying to encourage, or what's the word I'm looking for? I guess like further flesh out our ways of thinking in the long term and like how that should affect our actions. That's what I'm currently interested in. Thanks. Yeah, Andrew, do you want to make a comment? It looked like you were raising your hand, or yeah.
Kind of, yes. So forgive me as I kind of try to phrase all of this on the particular touchiness of this sort of ideas of atrocity and agency and all of that. But what I kind of find interesting as the sort of axis on which we're having all these arguments and having to kind of have this be a problematic is essentially the question of, okay, where is our agency in relation to all this, right? So like the whole aspect of there's this kind of mental shock or freeze when we are faced with the irreversibility of history, and kind of, okay, well, what are we supposed to do then in that relation to that? So there's this self-conceptualization that normally happens as you're kind of specifically talking about the sort of context of the UK. Obviously, I'm more US, so there's different aspects of that, but the element of like, okay, let's talk on this word of sacrifice, right? That there is this assumption that the reason why this sacrifice, quote unquote, had to happen is because you're at the behest of this entity that is forcing in order for your continued existence, that you have to do this. However, instead of, if we want to use kind of stereotyped Bronze Age kind of examples, instead of Baal and Moloch, we have history and progress as the sort of entities to which we have to quote unquote make sacrifice, despite the fact that there's obviously someone holding the knife. But there's this sort of conception is, I think, maybe a sort of psychological response in the sense that, like, okay, well, I have to make it so that I am not complicit in this particular thing in order to continue to live. However, then there's sort of like the aspect of, okay, kind of going back to Brandom, where there's this whole aspect of like, okay, like due to these sort of possibilities or whatever, we have to forgive unforgivable atrocities, rather than conceptualization of a position of, no, you're actually very much complicit in it. You are created by it in some capacity. The blood is still on your hands, but rather than falling into a nihilistic point where there is no possibility to escape beyond that, there then must be a sort of Beckett-ian response, as in Samuel Beckett response of, I cannot go on, I must go on, or I will go on. That then, okay, you have the blood on your hands, you are a being of atrocity in some capacity. What do you do from there? How do you build from there?
Yeah. Sorry, the doorbell just rung, so hold that thought. I'll be back in 5 seconds. Hello? That's fine. Hey, sorry about that. Again, good question. I guess I'm just more interested in hearing more about what you think about that. So the kind of Samuel Beckett response, like what does that mean to you? Are you kind of saying that you that's something that you subscribe to, or?
Sort of. I will admit I am kind of introducing this partially as I'm kind of mentally, without getting into sort of TMI, sort of trying to mentally dig my way out of a sort of depressive nihilistic point of like, okay, well, what can be done, and that sort of thing. There's also like a bit of a Buddhist strain to the end of it, maybe a bit of like a very shallow Buddhist reading of it. But like one of the important things that is interesting in, like, I think the Diamond Sutra, is that the first thing that is mentioned is essentially can be summed up as, you first must recognize that the world is suffering before we can go on to the sort of aspect of, okay, well, how do we escape the cycle of samsara and all of that sort of thing? So partially as a response to the seeming compulsion to a sort of moral righteousness and absolutism, which it is kind of funny given sort of recent events and my own reactions, but that's an aside, is that basically, how do I want to phrase it? Basically, in order to create these sort of grand macrocosmic historical projects of like, okay, well, what is ultimately to be done? How are we to treat the sort of grandness, the almost impossible to fathom nature of history? First, you must recognize that you are actually a part of this sort of matrix of history. You are part of that history as it is being always already made, rather than sort of memory holding your relationship to it in order to essentially have a, I'll say it in this sort of rather rude and very aggressive sense, a mediocre kind of life throughout that. So essentially, like, the sort of prospect is like, okay, I don't want to sort of give permission to the sense of like, okay, we can just kind of sort of forgive these sort of atrocities as an inevitability of, oh, look at, we're at this utopian prospect now because it's always already proving itself to be something that needs to be addressed. But also, I don't really vibe with, for lack of a better term, the position of that there has to be then an absolutely moral, righteous position, which can in and of itself forgive further violence, further suffering, further atrocity on that prospect, without first, and this is a very kind of how do I want to phrase it? Contentious without that I'm linking to this at this point, is that essentially there can be no action that can ultimately provide a worthwhile project without first recognizing that you yourself are within a series of contingencies and matrices of atrocity, of violence, of which you are in some way reacting to and contributing to. if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think it really does. I think, and again, it's that sense that we've been trying. I think, you know, throughout a bunch of these you know, different strands of conversation, that I think the thing that we're kind of touching on is, I guess, how would you say it? Yeah, like the sense of not just historical situatedness, kind of necessarily to everything we do and think and etc. But you know, this sense of unfinishedness to it. Yeah, I just really, yeah, given the fact of looking to the past ways of thinking, and it's, you know, nicer in some of the crazier things, like for example the iguanodons reappearing that I always go on about, you know, that's like hilariously wrong. We can all agree that that's like probably not going to happen, is like iguanodons returning anytime soon in this particular kind of cosmic locale, right? That's like hilariously wrong. And you look, you know, you look across this past thinking and it seems to be this like massive sea of error. And I guess, yeah, you know, that it cannot but be the case that we are also in the same situation. I think that's like a really important thing to think. And now that's me just kind of also talking about like factual idea of the world. But as you point out, I think that we can completely analogize that with, like, you know, as you say, kind of the samsara, like the suffering of the world right now, right? You know, we're constituted by that system. We are part of it. I guess one of the interesting things is that, like, a lot of some of these, so particularly with my sense of, like, you know, cosmos thinkers like Fedorov, was that he was motivated by this like very clear sense that it was like the kind of labor of the future is to like actually almost like make up for the atrocities of the past. So like not reach a state of forgiveness or a state where they've been justified, but a state where like almost the whole future is the work of atonement for the past. Like he has this really, you know, I'm not sure whether it's right or like a good way of thinking about the world, but I think it's a very, the way he articulates it is very engaging, is that that is the labor of the future is making up for this like sea of awfulness from which we have emerged, right? And you see that theme kind of appearing in a few places with different kind of, you know, future thinkers, is that we've emerged almost from this like sea of this cascade of like pain and suffering from, like, you know, the universe pre anything kind of biological going on in it was just like, you know, kind of just squandering energy, like slamming against like planets, like, you know, sunshine, just, you know, bearing down like kind of these romantic visions. And then Darwinian evolution you can romantically portray as like this just chain of awfulness, which persists to this day, right? You know, wild animals, probably people that have thought into this mostly agree that they on net just suffer. So, you know, and then we're kind of this pinnacle of it where, if again, I'm aware that these are very romantic ways of thinking about things, because humanity is in no sense a pinnacle or inevitable. It's like a branch on a branch on a branch that is completely contingent and, you know, didn't need to have happened. But nonetheless, this point that kind of feels that and is able to kind of be compassionate in a disinterested sense about that suffering of the world. Like, you know, I find that there, you know, regardless of whether it's romantic, there's something appealing in that image, and I guess motivating as well, right? Is that, well, what can I do? What can I do to make this better? Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, I do think that there's a distinction there. I'd be interested to hear what maybe, you know, Andrew, Carl, anyone else who's kind of particularly taken up this strand thinks about that. If you're familiar with the kind of cosmist vision, like, you know, I do think that there is a distinction there between justifying the atrocities and almost like atoning for them. I'm not sure what that distinction is or if it's persuasive, but I think there is like at least an aesthetic and rhetorical distinction there. But, yeah.
So,
oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh wait, was someone else going to give a comment?
No, please go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. This is going to be a very like it talk to me in like 2 years if I am anywhere accessible kind of situation, because obviously this is all in progress. So you know, a disclaimer to proof against future cancelability. But basically, I almost I almost wonder if there's like a third kind of question of like, okay, well, there's like either the justifying of atrocity, the atonement of atrocity, and the living with atrocity. Like it like almost if it's because the sort of position that I'm at right now with this sort of question is that there is neither a justification nor an atonement that can truly be done in the wake of how terrifyingly grand the atrocity can be, right? And this is kind of more a question of like, okay, are we dealing, first of all, we kind of need to kind of have this distinction between like, okay, are we doing this as a collective atonement or justification, or are we doing this as an individual atonement and justification, and how much do those two interplay in each other? For me, at this point in my life, I can only really talk to a personal aspect of this sort of thing. But obviously, like, it is a much more important question. Well, maybe not much more important question. I should put that aside, because again, like I said, there's an interplay between the two. But that is, at least in my position at this time, not really a question that I'm able to answer. But at least as a personal aspect of it, the only thing in a way that can responsibly be done without having to do a sort of revisionism or attempt to like kind of have a sort of like hero complex about, you know, being single-handedly able to like atone for the grand thing that like it's almost hard to even fathom as a single person, is to learn how to live with the atrocity, is to live maybe in spite of it, but however you want to motivate the living with, if it's in spite of it, because of it, as a reaction to it, who knows? That's ultimately the personal decision. But one has to learn how to live with the atrocity to begin with, because otherwise you just kind of have to go insane. Because then you go into absolute purity, which is completely, never mind if it's, you know, like obnoxious or whatever, it's completely untenable. So at least on the personal aspect of it, I don't think, like, it maybe like the atonement as a group project might be something possible, but that would have to be multiple groups working in conjunction, and there has to be an actual form of solidarity, which is again like more of an allegiance that between various organizations to work towards that atonement, and however that is to be formulated is ultimately between them. But as far as personal engagement with this aspect, it is more of a living with rather than a ultimate declaration of, can it be atoned, can it be justified, that sort of thing. It can only be lived with. And yeah, I will say beyond, but only as a possibility of how one can react to it. Ultimately, it is with, the question is, how does the person who is engaging with that in a existentially responsible manner, less filthy is kind of like, oh wait, see, hold on. Okay, never mind. I'm just getting distracted by the chat. But yeah, basically, yeah, ultimately, how does one live with rather than atone or justify? That is my answer.
Yeah, I think that's a, a nice way of putting it. Yeah, it made me think of like the question in ethics of, you know, moral demandingness. Like some theories appear to be just like counterintuitively demanding. And yeah, again, talk of paralysis. People say that really demanding theories kind of don't work or don't go through because of that. They cause this sense of paralysis. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's one thing. Yeah, it just makes me think of that when responding to that. But yeah, I realized that I haven't actually been paying attention at all to the chat bar, so I'm going to stop sharing the slide. How do I stop? Oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah, good luck.
Am I no longer sharing? How do I stop that?
You've stopped sharing.
Oh, have I? Okay, cool. Great. Yeah, so has there been like a really rich conversation in the chat that I've just been stupidly ignoring? Sorry if I have. If there's been some really fantastic questions in there, which I'm sure there have, and I just haven't been paying attention, I'm very sorry. I got carried away with just having the presentation up there and not saying. I'll tell you what, I mean, because it'll just require me sitting here and going through it, which is probably not going to be productive. I will read through it after this session, and we can, if there's, ignoring it was a fairly prudent decision. Why is that?
There's so much there. I think it's always like there's a parallel stuff where people want to get their ideas out, but I don't know. I'm only speaking from my own
Yeah,
engagement.
there's like a whole other seminar going on in there about like discussing value.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, yeah. So I will. I'll try and read through it. Let me copy it. So I'll read through it before the next session.
Will it be uploaded in the Google Classroom, Tom?
Oh, will it? Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I'll read through it, and and so hopefully that can provide some material for next time. So I'm sure there's some very good stuff going on in there that I just ignored. Sorry. But yeah. Okay. Fine. Well, tell you what, because we've got like 50 minutes left, right? Let's just talk about, I guess, the reading material. Let me remind myself what was on there. But I just wanted to get some of your thoughts on, responses to the stuff on there, and like if any of you, kind of liked any of it, if any of you hated any of it, what you thought about it. I'd love to hear. So yeah, if anyone wants to, has any kind of immediate responses or wants to take the stage, that would be great. Otherwise, I guess I can just go through individually and see what anyone thought about anything.
I think we have a question from Maria.
Oh, right. Okay. God, I'm already ignoring the chat again.
Oh,
yeah. Hi. Sorry, Maria. Yeah,
Hi.
of course. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask what was the sense in the article with razors on the moon? I didn't understand it. So it was really funny, but I didn't get it.
Yeah, no, thanks. Did you read the one before on the reading? So Haldane's Last Judgment? Right. So like, yeah, it's like a satire. It's like a send up of that. So I guess, yeah, I wanted to put this in here to like, put in like a really hilarious and well-written negative view of like, a satire of this kind of thinking that, we're going to be talking about, like long-term thinking or grand futures thinking. So yeah, this Haldane piece, The Last Judgment, I really like it as a piece of science fiction, particularly because of, him writing it in the 1920s, and I think that there's some aspects of it that like haven't aged well, of course, but there are also aspects of it that are just like very forward thinking for a science fiction writer, writing in the 1920s. So namely, I think just the sheer scale of the future that Haldane paints, the people prior to this that had hit upon this point, H.G. Wells, of course. In terms of like sheer length of the future, Wells is great with this. There are a few other kind of late Victorian writers who are kind of good on this point. But as just like material for science fiction, I think just the claim that the future could be huge, which it rested at the time on a really interesting shift. Again, I guess, we were kind of talking about this earlier of how our shift in our sense of how the world is factually then change what we think could be done within it or should be done, etc. Is that towards the end of the Victorian era, most physicists agreed that the sun was cooling down. Their mechanism for how it was doing so was wrong. They thought it was based on gravitational contraction. This was prior to people being aware of subatomic process. So they didn't know that like fusion was going on, which would fuel it for like a huge amount of time. And they thought that the world was going to end, as in the sun would cool down and then Earth become uninhabitable within like kind of ranging between 7 million to 17 million years, which is obviously a long time. It's longer than the whole of civilization, but it's like, it's not that long. And people did make this claim. They were like, there was this kind of general pessimism about the far future at this point in time. Anyway, around 1900, people discovered radioactivity. Then people started saying there's this vast amount of power at the subatomic level. This is going to fuel the sun. People's predictions went a bit over they went a bit overconfident, but people were saying the sun would go on for a trillion years. So a million years, and the world was going to remain inhabitable for that point of time. So physicists around this time started going, wow, the future could be huge. Some of them were forward thinking and said, but it might not be because we might screw it all up now, which is an interesting insight. But this is the context for this Haldane piece. So he goes, oh yeah, the future could be gigantic, and if humanity does the right thing, it could then what I really like is at the end of the story, he says, that, say, humanity or its descendants becomes kind of starfaring and, you know, moves from star to star, he makes this wild claim, really wild at the time, because beyond kind of physical predictions of like how long the sun might shine, doing any kind of like quantitative estimate of future time spans beyond that scale of the solar was just off the cards. Like most physicists would never want to go near that because it would be considered kind of insane. But Haldane just goes, oh yeah, well if we kind of, you know, took to the galactic scale, then humanity or its descendants would exist for tens of trillions of years. He says like 80 trillion years or 70, right? Which is just really cool. I really like it as this kind of canvas for like opening up this canvas for science fiction and imagination, like, you know, thinking what could be achieved, what, you know, etc., what could go wrong, all of this stuff. Like the ending of that Last Judgment piece is almost like Haldane's kind of manifesto for future science fiction, right? He's like, go forth and fill this canvas, which I think is really cool. So to finally wrap around and answer your question, this Davis piece, The Last Judgment with the razors on the moon, it's him taking a piss out of that kind of thinking. So as soon as it emerged, people were already satirizing it, which is a pattern that happens quite often, as far as I'm aware, with kind of novel forms of, particularly at the intersection of science and like what it means for culture or kind of ethics or whatever. People kind of, there's always a nice satirist around to like kind of try and poo-poo this new way of thinking about the world. Like I'm thinking of like Jonathan Swift, like the great English satirist. Like he spent his time taking the mick out of scientists and saying that they were, you know, ineffectual and silly because instead of making the world a better place, they were putting small animals in vacuum pumps. And why are we doing that? You know, like, so it's in that tradition. And I really like it. I think it's funny. Is him kind of this kind of problem with the razors, and I guess it's just, I think he's reacting to Haldane's this kind of quantitative nature of like how big the future could be, like this idea of like, you know, at some point he talks about however many billion razors there are, and yeah, I like it. I mean, I guess that's how I would try and explain it as a piece of writing. I think it interestingly kind of foreshadows some themes in like current futures thinking, where it's like, you know, like the paperclipper stuff in AI, that like if you get a misaligned AI that really thinks that creating paperclips is the best thing, then it will just turn everything into paperclips. Like it almost echoes that in a nice way. But yeah, regardless, that, you know, that's a tangent. But yeah, that's my sense of the piece. I'm not sure if it's the right one, but yeah, what did you make of it? Did you enjoy it? Yeah, what did you kind of think it was about?
This is what I thought. I thought that Haldane was not understood well in his times and was satirized a bit, but I thought there was a different layer of meaning, maybe, but apparently not. But nevertheless.
Oh no, I mean, I'm sure there is, but what yeah, please expand on that. Like what could it, what kind of other layer?
What could it mean?
Sorry?
Could it mean? What probably could it mean? The different layer of meaning. I don't know.
Does anyone else like have a, you know, like?
May I?
Yeah, of course, please.
Well, I don't think it has another layer of meaning, but with the benefit of hindsight, we can always get some interpretation out of it. I like it very much as satire, but I think we could even satirize the satire itself because, well, not at first. At first, we could, of course, I looked at the issue of shaving razors cluttering up every geological fault all over the globe, and I thought, okay, we have an issue here. We have a pollution, a global issue here, and he didn't know he was tackling that kind of issue. I imagine, I'm assuming there was no intention of satirizing pollution and ecological issues. And secondly, something I gleaned from a really liberal interpretation of the text is that, well, it is an issue because humankind, which is described as men, did not change. It kept on, you know, living in its very conservative shape of being mostly male and bearded. So he doesn't consider that we may need to change as well and leave this shape, which is quite interesting. I thought you left it there with that in mind. If not, well.
So, yeah. Does anyone have any responses to that? Otherwise, I'll jump in.
I'll say just one tiny thing. I thought a few minutes ago, or maybe an hour ago, when you were talking about contingencies, this story came to mind, right? So I was thinking of the used razor blades as this contingency. It's like the thing, this sort of thorn on the side of humanity that keeps maybe preventing humanity from reaching or maximizing its full value, right? It's sort of this kind of, I don't know, a kind of attachment of evil of some kind.
Yeah. People call it counterfeit utility as like this kind of like trying to maximize like the wrong thing almost. I see echoes of that in this story. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean on the point you made, Philippe, on the kind of, I guess it's him satirizing Haldane, who I think I definitely think so, and I think many of you would agree, was on the whole like a quite progressive, forward-thinking thinker. In some ways, he really wasn't, but in the broad brushes, I think he was. The satirist is obviously coming from like, if we think that's true, then the satirist is coming from like a quite reactionary kind of position, and yeah, I think it's not a coincidence at all that his way of kind of contracting that future and making it like pathetic instead of like kind of wide and grand thinking. I mean, this is always a technique in satire. It's like bathos, right? Is he contracts this like vast, expansive possibility that Haldane's talking about of like post-human species and like different humans being made for different planets, which interestingly shows the kind of plasticity of the term human back then, is that they would, Stapledon as well, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Stapledon, right? Stapledon would refer to different species of humanity, which is, I think, quite nice, right? But yeah, like it's interesting because the reactionary satirist obviously then takes that big space of possibility of different humanities and different descendant species and just like collapses it back into a question of shaving for like, kind of, presumably I'm imagining kind of late Victorian looking, well, like, 1900s looking dudes, right, with their shaving issues, which it works as satire because it's funny, because it's pathetic, right? But it's like so reactionary. But I guess, that's kind of the point, is he's like contracting this whole future that Haldane's opened up into the, very quotidian issues of the kind of reading public at the time, right? Is shaving and but yeah. So I'm just, I guess we're kind of running out of time, but did anyone have any other thoughts about like anything in the reading? I think the Haldane's probably the best bit, right? But anything else, any other responses, anything, or any other texts that stuck out? Well, I just want to hear your responses to anything.
I'd like to mention two things. I'm sorry. Just that in just as a something to add on top of what we were talking about just now, the satire. I think will be always really important to look at satire, at these reactionary, kind of reactionary thinking, to know what kind of worries will we want or have to tackle if we want to jump off into other galaxies, because those will be our worries as well. So that was it. And about the readings, sorry, I lost it. I loved it all. But,
No worries. I guess this is a nice theme that it looks like we're kind of keep returning to. If humanity achieves this kind of a good future, right? Maybe a grand one, who knows? Like, I think for me personally, I really hope that this parochial image of the human, that like we are in the process of kind of deracinating, disarticulating, dismantling, like that will continue, right? And I really strongly feel that, because just looking through the history of these things, right, is like that seems to be, and your point is so good, that it's the satirists almost who, in these particularly the kind of reactionary satirists who like to denigrate this kind of grand thinking. It's like a really interesting and like informative place to be looking to find where these potential kind of nodes of these relevant sites of or targets for critique or blah 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 rest. I think that's a really cool way of thinking about these things. I'll try. I'll have a think and see if there's like any other good satire. If any of you have any good ideas of like similar texts, I would like absolutely love to hear of people kind of trying to take the mickey out of these ways of thinking.
Well, Lem himself was a great satirist.
Yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you because I remembered what I wanted to say. I love the discussion today. I contributed to it in the chat, but I got the sense that your slides were something that were a bit came from your two texts in the syllabus, but there was newer stuff. Could you share them to the Google Drive?
I can.
Because there was stuff left out today, right?
So it's like new. So it's probably actually there is newer stuff. So I'm kind of working on like some new stuff. It's a lot of it is to do with like the expanding timescale stuff that I mentioned. So the effect of discovering subatomic process, how that completely exploded time horizons. I'll after, because they're still a work in progress, because I'm gonna, I don't know, I felt like actually just as a kind of feedback thing, like I felt that I was kind of just talking and the slides maybe weren't the most productive thing. So if any of you feel strongly either way, like please do let me know, like, because next time I won't take that approach, because I did feel it was a bit like I'm going to talk now for ages, and I feel like I kind of used some time that now I'm having fun talking about the actual reading, and maybe should have maximized that a bit more. So if any of you have any thoughts on that, please do let me know as well, because I want this to be as fun, and probably also I want you guys to be talking as much as possible as well. So maybe if next time it's like a very much shorter one, because there were still some more slides after that as well, right? So maybe if I just try and focus on something a bit more pithy. I don't know. What do you guys think? If any of you think, please let me know.
Tom, we also have maybe 5 or 6 presenters that should be going next week. So
of course, right.
Can help with just diversifying some of the class content. And just a reminder that we're not meeting next Saturday. We are skipping and then meeting in 2 weeks.
Thanks. That's I hope that works with everyone's schedule. But thanks. How do we decide on the presentations? Is it a kind of volunteer, or how does it work?
We do have a range of readings. Do you want to maybe have 5 people go from what is happening on week 2? Folks can also share if we could have 2 people presenting on one author, one reading.
So I'm just reminding myself what the reading is for next time. It was more burnout. We didn't even talk about burnout this time. There's some Lem. I said like the Fermi alien stuff. So if any of you think that you'd be interested in that, so it's like Fermi paradox, astrobiology, aliens. And there's some more reading that I'll put into the classroom. Not required, not obligatory, but just stuff that has been fun to kind of teach and discuss in the past. So I'll put some of that in as well. So, but if any of you think you'd want to like kind of talk about aliens for a bit, I'd recommend presenting next time. So. Okay, so Philippe, right? So sorry, Jonathan, how many presenters do we need? It's 5, or was it 8?
with the attendance that we had today, I think it needs to be at least 5 to 6.
Okay, cool. So, so we got Philippe, Alexandra, brilliant. Ender, is that yeah? So, anyone else?
One general question about how we manage the presentations. Do we do them like, okay, in the end of each session for the next session, or do we have like some overarching document where we just like put our names into and say, okay, here we have an overview who presents when. So what way do we go there?
I think that's a question for Jonathan. I'm
okay.
Don't have any idea how the new center like works in its current information. Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe and then maybe another question. Maybe we don't need to discuss this yet, but maybe with regards to essays and for people who need the credits. Yeah, because there's nothing on the syllabus about that.
Tom, that would be something that you would come up
sorry,
with.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was thinking about
So as far as I know, with all the new center seminars in the past, there was some kind of assignment that we had to hand in like some weeks after the seminar stopped, which is just like some kind of essay of a few pages, and which then gets graded, and which is for the people who need the credits for the seminar. And yeah, because there was nothing on the syllabus about that, I just wanted to ask to get that clear. And
okay.
I mean,
yeah. So I remember last time. So like I mentioned earlier, this was like years ago when I did the last new center thing. I think things have changed a bit since then. But the way that worked last time for the assignments was I think people just kind of chose a topic from the course that they thought was cool, and then wrote, as you say, it was like I didn't like give an upper limit because some people wrote a lot, but I wouldn't expect anything like more than say like 1,000 words even. I think you can say a lot in 1,000 words. So like whatever you guys think is useful. But whoever needs the credits, and I can see on the spreadsheet thing, I can see who that is. But for you guys, just a small piece of writing, just anything that hooks you, anything that you found interesting, a theme that recurs, that seems cool to you. I'd just love to I'd love to read like your response to it. So I think that makes sense, right? So have we got 5 people now for presenting?
I have 4 right now.
Okay.
I'm gonna send it in the chat.
I think Ender put his hand up as well or is that incorrect? Right, yeah, so we have, then that makes 5, right? Yeah.
Wait, who's the 5th one?
So
is Ender going as well?
Yeah, I can go next week. I don't really mind what text I present on, just any of them that's left. It's fine.
I think what's left is, depending on what Denise wants to do, there's the Bernal, so that's the next few chapters of World Flesh Devil, and then there's the Dolphin one by me, which is actually very similar to the Summons one. It's just this kind of shorter version. So, but it has some cool stuff on dolphins in it. So.
That's good satire, that one.
Yeah. I love a bit of Lily. But so is that? Yeah, should we? I think that makes sense for next time. Should we call it a day here?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. This is, like I said at the beginning, this group seems to be just perfect for these things. And I'll read through the chat, like I said, and I'm sure there's some good stuff in there. I always find that the chat's like the more kind of critical stuff goes in there, and that's like that's what I want. So, so more of that, please. So I'm going to enjoy reading through that, and hopefully that will open up some conversations for next time as well. I will think about the presentation thing. I'll read the feedback in the chat as well. And yeah, hopefully we'll just adjust and make this as good as possible for everyone. But for right now, I'm loving this group, and thank you so much for all of your contributions and questions and responses. And yeah, it's really valuable. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. So see you all in 2 weeks. But yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, bye.
Bye, thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.